What's good, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you are having a great day. In today's video, we're continuing our Hippopotamus Defense theory series, in which case we're really looking at, okay, what happens when we're trying to play the hippo and our opponent looks to throw a wrench into those plans. Now, it's good to know when we're playing the hippo that we can't always get it. Now, most of the time we do. I'd say in probably over 90% of the games that I try to get the hippo, I get it. But it is good to know when you can't pull it off or when it's not the right time to. And that's kind of what this series is about. Now, I know a lot of this theory isn't the Hippopotamus Defense, quote unquote. In fact, really, this is going to be more of a modern defense theory kind of video. But it's meant for both you modern players as well as you guys that play the hippo, but see these kind of weird moves and need to know what to do against it. Okay, now, here against the move e4, I recommend playing g6 and bishop g7. And here with the hippo, we're usually playing d6, e6, right? Tucking our knight, b6, tucking our second bishop, fianchettoing it, and getting eventually into our full thick-skinned hippo. In part 2 of this series, we looked at the move of e5, which is really not that scary. We play d6 anyways, and we're good. Today, we're looking at this move of d5. Now, first off, I think that this move has a bunch of issues for white. I think white is overextending here. I don't think they're developing their pieces fast enough, their back rank pieces. I would also say that by playing this, I mean, you just made our already active bishop that much better. I mean, your bishop on c1 right now is tied down to that pawn. And as always, we're going to play this move d6, and we have great control over both of these squares. Right now, we have one pawn covering both, and the only two pawns for white that can fight for those at the moment are the f pawn or the b pawn. And notice, the b pawn can't even move right now. By white committing so much on these white squares, they're giving up some squares that are going to come in handy for us later. Now, okay, we're going to be going over this move of knight c3. This is played quite a bit in online chess, as well as knight f3, right? I mean, white here just kind of throwing both of those knights out. But I must say, what happens if c4? Well, in this case, we're going to play e5. Now, if white wants to play something like f4, this is nothing to be scared about. We can capture back. The bishop, again, the bishop can't take, right? Unless you want to lose your pawn on b2. I mean, this bishop is a monster on g7. We're threatening queen h4 with check. Let's say you develop your knight. Let's keep expanding here. Let's play something like g5, play something like g4. If you want to centralize your knight, that's fine. Bishop e5. We're up a pawn right now, and honestly, I think we're the ones with the attacking chances and with, honestly, just the better strategic advantage right now in terms of spatial awareness. And, this bishop on e5 right now is just not going to be able to get touched. Right, we have a lot of moves here that could help us improve our position. Knight f6, I think queen f6, bringing this knight to d7, maybe looking towards knight c5 at some point. These dark squares are ours. White's king is not feeling comfortable, and we're up a pawn. Going back to the move of e5. If white captures on e6, we take back with the bishop. And this isn't winning for black, but I would say that the edge goes to black. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? White's the one that moved first, and none of their back rank pieces have even moved yet. We, on the other hand, have two very active bishops. Now, I know this isn't a hippo, but this is a very solid game, right? You can throw both your knights out to c6 and f6 and really fight for a lot of those central squares with those two minor pieces. You could also throw one of the knights maybe on e7 to prep f5. Maybe throw this knight on d7 to come to a square like c5, right? There's a lot of different ideas here, but overall, this is just a great position for black to work with. We have a lot of potential breaks, and these pawns on e4 and c4, I just don't feel them, making that much of a threat in terms of their presence in the center right now. They don't have a lot of support, right? The d pawn isn't there anymore, so there's that. And going back to d6, let's say we see something like f4. I do want to mention this move. Now, this move is barely played, but it is worth mentioning. In this case, I'm not recommending the move of e5, but instead knight f6, right? Just going after that pawn. Again, white can play e5 all they want, but if they keep extending this quickly, we're just going to be able to take and just win the pawn on d5. We're better here. And going back to knight f6, something like knight c3, we can play c6, just starting to chip away. This kind of feels a little bit like a check pierce to me, except white is really, down development right now. We're only one move away. The next turn, if we want to, we can castle. White's not even close right now. We have a very active bishop. We have a queen that's going to be coming to a5 very soon here in some lines. And okay, if you want to take on c6, we can take towards the center with our pawn. You can play e5, which does seem a little bit scary, I will admit, but we just drop our knight back. If you take on d6, let's keep developing, right? If you want to take again, we can take on e7 with check. We could even just move our rook. Kind of a fun idea. This rook e8 move is one that It kind of reminds me of one of the lines in the Austrian attack against the Hippopotamus Defense. I'll leave a link to that video down below so you can go check that out. But the whole idea here is like you can't make a second queen, right? Because you're pinned. And the engine move here is king f2. That's the engine move, in which case we're going to take on e7, and I'm taking black there any chance I can get. And I mean, let's just say, for example, knight f3 is played, right? Here's the reason why white can't play traditionally. If you block with the queen, for example, queen f8, your queen's attacked right now. If you play knight e5, I mean, we're just going to take that guy out. And if you play something like bishop e3, queen b4, this bishop is pinned. This knight is pinned. This knight is also attacked by our bishop. The pawn on b2 is hanging right now. Black is winning this position. So we go back to the move of c6. And if something like knight f3, we can take on d5, right? And if you capture back with the pawn, queen a5. I mean, there's so many things in the air here. We're looking at something like knight e4 potentially. If you want to play bishop d2, we can take on d5 because the queen would no longer be defending that square. Let's say something like bishop e2 here, right? The whole idea being that that queen tries to keep vision on that pawn. Well, it doesn't matter. We're going to take it anyways because the knight is pinned. And if you capture back with the queen, we're going to remove the defender with our bishop, take the queen yet again. We're crushing. Okay, so we'll go back to d6. And yeah, I mean, if you want to learn, kind of more ideas about this c4, e5 position, I will leave a link to my neo-modern defense videos. I made 2 of those. As far as I know, those are the only, I think, videos out there on the neo-modern at the moment, which I didn't even know existed until recently. And the neo-modern's a ton of fun. So if you want to learn more about how to play this kind of position, definitely make sure to go check those videos out once this one finishes. But okay, we have that move of d6. Let's say we see something here, white playing knight c3. Okay, we're going to play e5, right? We're going to play e5. Now, one of my favorite kind of lines to play against is when white just plays knight f3. They just keep developing their pieces. And this kind of turns into a better King's Indian defense, a better Hippo in some senses. It's kind of combining the Hippo, combining the King's Indian defense in a lot of different ways, in which case we're playing the King's Indian defense, but we're up more tempo. We'll get into that in a moment. But let's say white takes on e6. We're just going to capture back with our bishop. Again, this is a solid position for black, right? Nothing to complain about. We can throw a knight out to c6. If you want to pin our knight, fine, we'll defend it. We're cool with that. We'll castle kingside. If you want to pin our knight on e7, go ahead, right? You can take the knight all you want. And this is what I'm talking about, right? It's in positions like these where, this pawn on e4, it just doesn't have a lot of leverage. We have this very well covered, that square on e5. We, on the other hand, we have potential moves like d5, f5, g5. In this case, we can kick that bishop back. We can play f5. We're threatening to trap that bishop. And if you take on f5, we capture back with the knight. Our pieces are in great tandem here. I mean, let's just say you make a move like queen d2. We play g4. This knight right now can't go anywhere without simply getting captured. Right? We have so many active pieces at the moment. You run back. We play h5. A lot of rich ideas here. Queen e7, queen f6, maybe bishop h6, bringing this rook over. We have knights ready to pounce into the center at a moment's notice. And it just feels like white here is kind of scrambling to try to figure out what to do in this kind of instance. So we go back to e5. And again, this move f4. Now, in this case, it's actually better because when we do capture back, right, the bishop actually can take, right? The knight is on c3. So we're not just going to take on b2 and win a rook, but we can play a move here like knight f6. And I think we just have a huge advantage in terms of squares that are going to be active. I mean, e5 and c5 are ours. There's no pawn for white that can attack that square on e5. And you could argue that, okay, white has control of the light squares, but they really don't because we're also fighting for those, right? When you're playing chess, you got to be mindful of the fact that anytime you move a pawn, you're permanently weakening squares. And that's okay. It doesn't mean we never move a pawn, right? I mean, if we never moved a pawn, we can never get our bishops out. We can never get our queen active, all that kind of stuff. But it's just good to know that, if you push the pawns too far, you might hurt yourself more than you think. In this case, just to show that example, let's say white keeps forging ahead, trying to play attacking chess. We capture back. White doesn't have that many attacking pieces. Most of white's pieces are just kind of sitting back doing nothing. As I told some kids at camp today, they're taking a nap right now, right? They're not doing much. In this case, we can castle. We're already castled and the king is still in the center. We have a move like rook e8 or queen e7 on the way. Space doesn't mean anything in chess if you don't have the resources to back it up. And going back to knight f6, I mean, let's say something like queen d2. I still think castling's okay. I mean, you can castle queenside all you want. We can play rook e8. We're putting pressure on e4. There's nothing that can support this pawn. They've already given up their f pawn. They've pushed this pawn to d5. So there's no pawns that can support it. You got to play something here like bishop d3 as an example. In that case, we can play knight bd7, looking at a square like c5, and really just putting a ton of pressure on that pawn. And don't forget, right? Don't forget the fact that this bishop is very active, and we could get some queenside play at some point, depending on how we want to go about that. So, when we look at this move e5, there really are a lot of different things that can happen there in our favor. And if something like knight f3, right, and white falls into this kind of thing all the time, I'm not recommending knight f6. Okay, now when we look at this pawn structure, this is a King's Indian defense type pawn structure. We don't want to push this pawn on c7, right? Because then white takes, the pawn on d6 becomes weak, d5 becomes potentially a hole, depending on what happens. But this pawn on f7 is free to roam. But in this case, let's take a slow approach. So let's play knight e7. If you want to pin us, let's play h6. You can take us all you want. We're going to take back. We're going to have the bishop pair in that instance. If you drop the bishop back, let's play knight d7. This is what I like to do. Just play quietly, keep developing my pieces. I don't like to show my cards right away. I mean, even after bishop d3, I'm going to castle. And white often here will just castle as well. But now we have f5. And, I mean, just great attacking chances here on the king side. By the way, if white castles queenside, we still have great play with f5. That's still playable. We can still play knight c5 after that and put a bunch of pressure on that pawn. And white here can fall into trouble very quickly. I mean, let's just say something like queen e2, g5. The best thing you can do is sacrifice for this pawn, because if you run back, guess what? f4, your bishop is trapped, and you're not going to get much back for it. A single pawn, actually. And okay, after g5, sure, you can get a couple of pawns out of it, but in this kind of position, knight f6, we are objectively better in this case. I mean, we're at the verge of winning this if we play this correctly. And going back to f5, I mean, again, if you want to take on e7, we capture back with the queen. Anytime you see a locked up center like this, right, and white takes, just look towards the sides. If there's a pawn there, if there's a black pawn there, sometimes it's the right choice. Oftentimes it is to take with a pawn, because now pawns side by side are very active. You're wiping out half of the fourth rank. You can play f4 or e4 whenever you want to, and your opponent can't rush you into it. And they got to worry about it every single move. The moment we ever play f4, our bishop on c8 becomes more active. The moment we play e4, not only are we, looking at some potential, fork stuff in the center, but our bishop on g7 gets more active, and we get a knight e5 move in some instances. So, we play that move of f5, and again, if e takes, what do we do here? Well, okay, obviously we're not going to take with the knight because we don't want to lose our queen. We're not going to take with the rook, but even, let's just say this bishop was back here. I'm still taking with the pawn. I'm still taking with the pawn because pawns side by side are very dangerous. In this kind of case, we can keep just shuffling pieces over. Knight f6, knight g6, king h7, rook g8. Get that rook on that semi-open g file. Our rook can go on g8, which is our only semi-open file at the moment. White's only semi-open file is rook e1, which, I'm sorry, it's just not posing a threat to us. So our rook on g8 is going to be a monster here. We're going to push like crazy, gonna make an attacking game out of this. So when we go back, right, if you see that move of d5, I just don't see how this helps white in the long run. You can play this move of d6, look towards e5. If white wants to en passant, great. We capture back with the bishop. We develop from there. A lot of leverage in terms of pawn breaks, g5, f5, d5, all that kind of stuff. And again, if white just wants to play it quietly and just keep kind of developing their pieces, we want to play f5, but I recommend to you guys that you don't play it right away, right? Don't show your cards right away necessarily. You can just play quiet moves, right? Play knight e7, play h6, play knight d7, castle, and eventually break with f5. And by the time you do, you're going to have so much chemistry and unity between your pieces, they're going to be ready to pounce. Our pawn structure here is very solid all the way back to c7. White's pawn structure here, e4. White's going to have to move their knight in order to support that pawn. And oftentimes they're not going to see it coming. I mean, the engine here is telling white to play knight d2 and f3 with an even game. But how many players are going to do that? Not many. Okay, so keep that in mind. And once you do trade off this pawn, right, once white gets distracted with that, or if we ever take on e4, d5 becomes weak. Right, between these two pawns, this is the weakest. Once this pawn on e4 falls, d5 becomes a big target. Again, I'm going to leave videos down below on both the Neo-Modern Defense and the Pirc Defense. I think both of those could help you guys a ton. And yeah, thanks for tuning in today's video. I'd appreciate it If you did like this video, if you could hit that subscribe button. We're trying to eventually hit 100,000. That's the goal. So all of you guys that are joining us in this journey to 100K are much appreciated. See y'all in the next one. What's up, y'all? It's July of 2024, and I wanted to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Y'all are helping me do this full time, and if you haven't checked out the benefits that you gain by becoming a member before, I highly recommend that you go and check it out. It's a lot of fun to hang out with you guys, get to know you guys better. Those of you that join the Patreon community, and on top of that, I mean, just a quick reminder, right? If you're wanting more content like this, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, as well as that notification bell, so that you don't miss out on a video coming your way. And again, I appreciate y'all. I'll see y'all soon. Peace.